Good afternoon and most welcome to the Church of Brämargården in the island in Gothenburg called Hisingen, the closest island of the Gothenburgian archipelago, sometimes it's called. It's the fourth island in Sweden and it's the most industrious part of all of Northern Europe, possibly with the competition of Hamburg. My bet would still be on Hisingen. We have Volvo and some other big enterprises here. This will be turn 26 of the series. It's progressing steadily, and I will return to the voice of the friend. It has opened up a whole alley of thinking and relating. It is most interesting. I call this bit caustic or concisely how the voice to the friend has interesting consequences about what we think about the world. We'll consider this as a sort of an explanation of this Derridian writing the article from the book by John Sally, sorry. I will add a link later on here. Somebody can find the book for me as a PDF, I'd be more than happy. I cannot read from it when I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to have a little bit of an ironical twist, so be pre-warned. And let's go on to it. The usual take of the world is that it's just a stage for the happenings of human beings. We walk, talk, move around, travel, transport ourselves like we had no connection to the world. Our wants, our thinking are not part of the world, they are a supplement to the world. We are detached from the world. Somehow, by some alien hand, we've been put into this world, and we had to make a life in this world as best as we could. A little bit like Robinson Crusoe being stranded on a tropical island, having to make do. I have many times heard the phrase, we're just visitors to the planet Earth. Carl Sagan frequently mentioned human beings are an anomaly in the universe. We don't properly belong here. So we have to make a living in this strange, weird place to which we have very little or no connection. We can try to discover it, and like aliens stranded on some weird planet, we can use our tools of observance, our empirical methods. We can use epistemology to tell fake from real. It's like we just landed on the planet Earth, and we now need to find our ways on this strange planet. all our thinking, our doings, our movements have no connection whatsoever to this planet. So better use to tools that are unconnected to ourselves and the planet. That's the way of going about. Everything will become sort of forehanded for us. And we can slowly learn about this detached, different world. Slowly, slowly, we can stake out the map like we stake out claims for a golden mine. And we learn more and more about this strange, detached, eerie looking world. And we have somehow managed to survive. Often something that could be said by evolutionists. How is it possible that human beings have survived all these millennia? And how did the dinosaurs survive so long than just to die with a huge meteorite landed in the Yucatan? There are so many questions for this unknown planet. But science and more technological forehanden will be the pharmakon, to use a phrase from Plato and Phaedrus. Will be the pharmakon to survive on this terra incognita, this unheimliche Welt, which we are more or less doomed to spend the rest of our lives on. We don't have a choice. We have to make do. But we learn as time passes how to take care of small children, what to give them. We use experimental analysis, methods, laboratory equipment. We take out the stomach from a newborn calf or something similar, and we put foodstuff into the stomach that is now detached from the body of the calf, and we put everything in a chamber that is free from contaminants to make it objective, to make it hold in every case. And by this we can learn that mother's milk is good for the child. Something we could not know before. And thanks to the procedure of taking it out of its situation, isolating it, cutting it off from the intestines and the mouth, the feeding tube and all that, we can make it objective, understandable. And this can help us. There was even some experiments in the Middle Ages, I think it was, to leave children out in the woods and see if they still learn language somehow. Good experiments. They should not be in context. This is also a sort of ambience, an atmosphere you get when you read Tractatus. This is what I felt the first time I read it. It was this strange feeling of the science fiction writer Stanley Urus, I think it's called, and how they, in one of the books, land on a completely different planetary system. And in this planetary system, the planets themselves had some sort of intelligence, and they could communicate that to the cosmonauts. And we learned, or they learned, as time passed, how to communicate with the planet and to interpret its signals. This was for me the eerie sound of reading Tractatus. Outlandish, a coldness sort of set when I read it. Like I was an astronaut seeing humans for the first time in my life ever. And oddly enough, some thought crept up to me. So where are these fantastic tools coming from? Not from this world. How were they given to me? Well, it's almost like a voice from nowhere saying to me, they have always been there. They are eternal. And I did not know where that voice was coming from. But I can tell you this, I most definitely did not want that voice to become stronger. Possibly this is rather an unlikely scenario. But still it seems like a good idea somehow to start all over again. And we are nothing like Eintwurft in the world, like Heidegger would put it. We have not always already been in this world. Let me give you an example of the Venerable Paul Feyerabend. And I would say he is really the voice of the friend. It is established a friendship I dearly feel, and I feel his concern, and I no longer feel that he's gone. Feel his presence. He mentioned that when he puts Xenophanes and similar authors, philosophers on the lecture, they often said he sounds so extremely modern. And he suggests it could be the opposite. Think about it. Could actually be the opposite. Let me tell you a little story here, how the visit to planet Earth could be sort of put into a story format, like a tale, like a saga of the Nordic time, and how that could sound, and if that could appeal to someone or make some sense. To sort of get into that feeling how this landing started, or how the ascent started. Let's try. Once upon a time, humans were stuck in the earth, in their habits, in their thinking. They could not look above on their thinking. We could not lift ourselves from our circumstances. We were in on the action, but we were not able to look at it. sometime in the ancient world, the first tendency that we did not belong to this earth came about. And I think it could be fair to say that came about as a tool. But it developed. And it ended up in the idea that our senses could be misleading. And that we could not really trust our very own experience. This is more or less the idea of Xenophanes, Xenon, and many others. That there is something more real than this blurred vision, this imagery, this falsehood sometime, these mistakes, and this imperfection or imperfections. We can rise from that and we can look upon it. This could be said to be the birth of consciousness. Maybe this is the departure from the earth, from our connections, from our roots with everything else, and an emerging consciousness. But I would like to term this the reflective consciousness. A sort of consciousness that doesn't have any properties. A consciousness without characteristics. Very similar to the God of Xenophanes. A God without personality, body, will, movement even. Didn't move in. And its thinking were not thinking. It was not substantial. It was direct. Happened before the thing. No motions, no details. As Xenophon said, the Nubians are making figures of gods like themselves, with big lips and noses pointing upwards. The Illyrians made their gods red-headed and fair-skinned and tall, whereas the Egyptians made their gods with a sharp nose and pointy cheek and a small stature. Doesn't it show, Xenophanes thought to himself, that if the cows were to have gods, they would have made those gods looking like cows, and the horses would have gods with a mane, long forehead, and hooves. Doesn't this show that God can be none of these things? It has, for some reason, to be unworldly or unworthy for a God to have these features. It's below God to have the features from the natural world. And this is Stanley Uris, this is Tractatus in a bit. It is very, very modern. And at this very same time, the world became just a world of intransparent objects, eerie, scary, almost completely different, distant. And they filled up this constructed or otherworldly world with their objects, and they demanded that emptiness were a fault on existence. It was a trait that the unnatural faked world had, but the perfect world could not allow for anything like vacuum. Emptiness was not a thing. Everything was dense, packed, unorganized, I'd say, because there is no organization of the thinking. None of that of the natural world. Even the god of Xenophanes, he didn't seem to have any order to him. The order that only a sort of an inclination could bring. And that's the eerie feeling. This is the sense of it doesn't feel right. It's just too odd. It's otherworldly. The world was completely out there, and for some reason we could no longer get a proper understanding of it. It was all falsehood, all made up, all invented, or mistakes, or delusions. And we were stuck in the cave, and we needed to get out. This is the birth of us being guests on earth, that we don't belong to the earth. At that time, there were still people who thought Xenophon was completely crazy and ridiculed him. But today, no one, I'd say, no one would put an argument against Xenophanes. How could they? He is as true then as he is today. This is, in a way, modernity as it is. And we have no choice than construct difficult methods to understand whether perception is correct or not. Because the mistakes should rule what we understand. The failure should be the pointers when we do get mistaken. Or I think Aristotle mentioned a drunk person mistaking a log for his wife and so forth. Those unusual particular occasions should be expanded, made into hyperbole, and always used for understanding, not normal perception, not success. Why use success when you can use failure to exaggerate our failings as perceiving human beings? Because obviously we can't understand the world as it is. We must calculate what comes in. Somehow this reflective consciousness came as a savior from this misery that it was to be connected to the world, in the world, of the world. So this is the Savior, this is the Messiah, this is the God of Xenophon, literally the God of Xenophon. This is the God. He is going to help us. And in the end, he was even ridden by his name. He was no longer called God. And his substance was slowly eroding as well, going into even more perfection. It's the route, it's the way, it's the path that Xenophon started. has been more and more refined, and the criticism of Xenophon could be from modernity: he didn't go far enough. Why? Well, his God is still existent. Let's rid him of existence as well. And that did not happen long after. And today, we no longer feel a need. You can say as Laplace, we only need some decimals. And we sort of put the problem under the cupboard. And this is jokingly referred to the Laplacian demon, or the Laplacian devil. And that mentioning of the Laplacian demon and devil should always come with a laughter or smile, to show we don't really believe in it, because we managed to get rid of even the Laplacian demon. Or so we thought. I'd say the laughter that came with the Laplacian demon, it's not a sincere laughter. It's a boisterous, megalomaniac laughter. And it's a wrong conclusion altogether. It's fundamentally wrong in a way that is so wrong it can't even be explained properly. Cannot even be put to words. It's beyond wrong. It's a sort of mistake you can't even do. Just sort of hide it. And in a way, this turn of events led to dishonesty, intellectual dishonesty of Laplace and much more people. Because there is still an observer, of course. He is in the equations, the Laplacian demon. And never ever does Laplace explain him. Nor did Newton or anyone else. And somehow in 1927-26 the Laplacian devil came knocking on the door and made his presence loud and clear. He is there. I think that was the last breath of the ludicrous ideas of Xenophon. I would say this idea had a birth. It wasn't the proper idea. It was the reality in itself, which cannot be explained, but it can be observed. You cannot put words to it, but you can see it. This sort of a riddle-like understanding came from quantum mechanics, and that ended the philosophy best before date of Xenophon, I'd say. But of course it lingered on. It's too entered into the thinking of our world. We can't do without it, and that, I would say, is actually true. No longer being ironical here, I would say we can't do it without it. We need really to reorganize, and we cannot sort of discover it without doing like Heidegger. And now you see another reason why the neologisms are so important. Otherwise you can never ever remember what was forgotten. And the forgetfulness is that we never ever left the world. We have always already been here. And if that is not the voice of the friend, what could be? It is the voice of the friend of Paul Feyerabend, showing us that we are still here. And that's a blessing, because that means that we can have knowledge, and it also means that knowledge can be here and now, and that we don't have to make enormously complicated procedures to get to it. And actually, by adding or putting in procedures, that is the pharmakon. Yes, it's a cure for the no-knowing of the visitors. It was a cure, but I think quantum mechanics shows the double nature of pharmakon. It's a cure / poison. That eerie feeling, it's not a nice feeling. Of course, we've gotten used to it. The eeriness is a part of our understanding of the world. That I would agree on. But maybe it's not a necessary part of the world. And by taking it away, we can not only gain a peace of mind, because obviously, if we're using a model that doesn't really fit the project, we're bound to end into problems. The voice of the friend has everything. Nothing needs to be taken away from it, since it's itself always already carries everything that is possibly needed. No face is needed, no name. Actually, putting flesh on the voice would block. It will be out of sync, will be out of time, it will be out of reality. But sorry chaps, there is no other place to go. The only thing you can do, and the thing that Aristotle, Plato, Xenophanes meant with otherworldly, is just trying to block your senses, block your perception, and go up in the head. It's the blocking out that is the otherworldly. And when I read that, when I understood that finally, I know that the eerie feeling had more substance to it. The eerie feeling is myself in some way blocking out reality. And of course that's a scary feeling. It's a little bit like putting earplugs and going to the traffic. You notice that you're so dependent on hearing things, and you feel scared. And the eerie feeling I got when very young, I listened to the voice of Carl Sagan standing on those animations that at that time was so amazing, having the whole sphere of the stars behind him when he said that we are just visitors to the universe and we are smaller than ants, and nothing we do, say or think has any consequences whatsoever on this grand universe. That produced an eerie feeling in billions of young children, I'd say, and it's still broadcasted to this very day. This is the modern take on Xenophan, and it could be seen as an obstacle also when now we want to understand the voice of the friend. Now in the voice of Derrida, coming from the friend of Heidegger, true friend, a friend that cares. And I think somewhere in the middle of Carl Sagan, he felt to be dishonest somewhere. Didn't feel right. How could it? Maybe he tried to convince himself to save what he had gained in need to attack the reality of existence. This, I would say, is a tendency to look out for. I think it could be helpful, secondarily, to use this feeling of eeriness and the eagerness in some people wanting to convince general public, not certain people, but speaking, so to speak, out in the air, convincing themselves of the unreality of the world, that we have nothing to do here. And one could put in a why here. Why did he say that? What did he want to accomplish, Carl Sagan? What was his message to the viewers of his television series Cosmos, made sometime in the 70s or 80s? Don't remember when, must have been in the 80s. What did he want to accomplish? What was the telos? Well, I would say it almost completely lacked telos, but some telos it must have been, to convince the world of the world's unreality. He was speaking to the world in general, trying to prove it wasn't there. Maybe his eyes were directed to the Laplacian devil or demon. But I would say now that that voice was not the voice of a friend or the voice of the friend. It was not friendly meant. There is a taint of dishonesty in that take, and there is no way getting away from that. And that he knows somewhere in his inner this is wrong. And I think it was directed to this general sense, or to himself to convince, because otherwise what would the telos was? It's absolutely depressing. If you would have asked Carl Sagan, he couldn't answer and say, well, I was just stating the facts or something. But I would say that's an excuse. Bad excuse. Really bad excuse. Wasn't stating any facts. It was a negative thing, and he could have shut up about it, for instance. Why mention it? That, I'd say there was a hidden agenda there. Might be he wasn't even aware of it himself. But why mention it? Sure as hell he didn't make the television series any grander, because they were fantastic. Why this supplement? It is weird. Thanks to, well, especially Rodolphe Gachet, I can be able to deconstruct that. It looks to fit in the TV series quite neatly. It looks like fitting very well with the brilliant stars and the amazing scenography. It's just sheer amazing for the time. One of the most expensive documentary series ever produced. But now I realize it's so out of place. And it's under the guise that he's actually telling something to you. some sort of fact, similar to the other things they told, that Betelgeuse was a million times bigger than our star, our nearest star, the sun. But it wasn't. It didn't contain any facts at all. No figures. Not even forehand. That was nothing of forehand. It was just his felt emotional take on the world. And it slid so neatly into the whole television series. And it was even repeated. But did anyone notice it was out of place? A little bit like saying, well, this morning I felt really bad because I went with some friends to party all night. That would be out of place. And I'd say this comment about the futility of humankind and how small we are, and it doesn't serve any purpose. It's not even Newtonian. It's oddly out of place. And it's oddly unnoticed. And I'd say the same goes for Jacques Monod, and the same goes for Steven Weinberg. It is not part of the tale. It's unfair, it's unjust. It doesn't have a place, doesn't have a natural place. And it actually, I would say, the second time I look at it, it interrupts the flow of that certain program. And I think the video photographer and the animators did their best to sort of keep it with music. It changed into a serious tone and everything to keep it with the whole series. A sort of a quasi-religious message of the Laplacian devil put into the whole thing and made into look seamlessly part of the same thing. I question that. Take it out, look at it carefully, and you see it's out of place. And I think this is how he reveals himself. And of course this is not only going for Carl Sagan, it goes as well for Xenophon and Xenon and others. There is always a weak point, bound to be. And it could even be from the point of view of Carl Sagan, the whole television series was to come to this sort of emotional outburst. In spite of what he felt in his inner, he needed to compete with that and state that even clearer. That was the rather surprisingly telos of what he was saying. I will finish off by reading something from Andrea Scarantino from the University of Pittsburgh, Department of History and Philosophy of Science. In this, I have to mention also that there are some nice reference here. Tony Chimero, of course. We have Carol Fowler, Bruno Galantucci, and Paul Griffiths, all grand names. Let's look what we can have instead. In the abstract, I am examine the central theoretical construct of ecological psychology. Bear with me here for this new phrase. And that's the concept of affordance. In the first part of the paper, I illustrate the role affordances play in Gibson's theory of perception. In the second part, I argue that affordances are to be understood as dispositional properties, and explain what I take to be the characteristic background circumstances triggering circumstances, and manifestations. The main purpose of my analysis is to give affordance a theoretical identity enriched by Gibson's visionary insight, but independent of the most controversial claims of the Gibsonian movement. The concept of affordance, I begin now in the text, is the central theoretical construct of ecological psychology. It was introduced in its full-fledged form by James J. Gibson in 1979 to account for what human and non-human animals perceive. The notion of affordances has recently been evoked by philosophical theories of mental content, but has yet to be submitted to sustained conceptual analysis. Notably, ecological psychologists themselves consider the notion of affordances still poorly defined. What I propose in this paper is firstly, a critical interpretation of Gibson's theory of affordances, and secondly, an analysis of the peculiar dispositional nature of affordance properties, nature framework for using the concept of affordance in the context of philosophical projects that may not share some of the assumptions and theoretical objectives of ecological psychology. Two, the concept of affordance is a theoretical concept introduced by Gibson to play a role he believed no existing concept played in psychology. Quote from the book: "The affordances of the environment are what it offers the animal, what it provides or furnishes, either for good or ill. The verb to afford is found in the dictionary, but the noun affordance is not. I have made it up. I mean by it something that refers to both the environment and the animal in the way that no existing term does. It implies the complementary of the animal and the environment." End of quote. The affordances of the environment, Gibson suggested, are the offerings of the environment, roughly the sets of threats, negative affordances, and promises, positive affordances, that characterize items in the environment relative to organisms. Gibson sometimes used a characteristic linguistic construct to refer to affordance, namely able. For example, he described a surface such as the brink of a cliff as fall-offable, a substance such as an apple as eatable, an object such as a stone as throwable, an animal such as a conspecific as copulate withable, conspecific, copulate withable, an event such as burning fire as cook withable. In each case, the affordance property is possessed by a bearer relative to a specific organism or class of organisms. Gibson introduced affordances to capture what he took to be the essential complementarity between organisms and environment. He believed such complementarity could be lost in two different ways, exemplified respectively by the languages of physics and phenomenology. Physics employs basic explanatory properties such as mass, charge, spin. These are paradigmatic objective properties, namely properties instantiated independently of any actual or potential response to the property bearer on the part of the organism. Every organism, Gibson thought, is a perceiver and a behavior, but this is not to say that it perceives the world of physics and behaves in the space and time of physics. End of quote. What the organism is a perceiver of and behave in are environments or niches. Gibson's idea is that the organism and the environment make an inseparable pair, where each term has to be understood relative to the other. This inseparability brings along two desiderata for theories of perception and action. Firstly, the size level of the physical world in which environment are carved must be intermediate one between the cosmic and the atomic. Organisms perceive and behave in a world of objects measured in the scale of the body sizes and engage in activities occurring at the temporal scale of biological processes. Secondly, the explanatory properties devised to understand perception and action must have relational nature, where the two terms of the relation grounding the property refer respectively to the organism and to the environment. One way to discharge the two desiderata is the one favored by phenomenologists. Gibson did not define phenomenology, but indicated the Gestalt psychologist Kurt Lewin and Kurt Koffka as representatives of a relational approach he wanted to improve on. Described objects in the environment in terms of what organism can do with them. For instance, Koffka ascribed to postbox the relational property of having a letter mailing demand character. However, Gibson took phenomenologists to assume that the demand character is bestowed upon the postbox in experience and bestowed upon it by a need of the observer. Instead, he wanted to define affordances so as to be able to say that the postbox is letter mailing withable relative to an organism. O, independently of whether or not it is perceptually experienced as such, and independently of whether or not, once perceived, it is attended by O. This will be contingent upon the needs of O. As he puts it, an affordance is not bestowed upon an object by need of the observer and his act of perceiving it. What bestows affordances upon items in the environment, Gibson suggested, are a set of real or objective physical properties of the affordance bearer and the organism that are relative to make a specific behavioral activity possible, e.g. grasping, catching, being eaten by, etc., and a parenthesis. For example, Gibson indicated that to be graspable, an object must have opposite surfaces separated by a distance less than span of the hand. End of quote. The properties that ground the threats and promises associated with affordance bearers will have to be studied by a new ecological physics, the explananda of which are perception-action couplings performed by organisms in environments. Some Gibsonians take the relevant physical properties to be relations between sizes of the body and sizes of the affordance bearer. But it is clear that this is only a preliminary step in the attempt to ground affordances into the physical world. As I will argue in the next section, an item X is graspable relative to O in virtue of O's ability to grasp X, and such ability does not consist merely of the presence of a physical relation between the distance of X opposite surfaces and O's span of the hand, e.g. the span of the hand of a person with a paralyzed open hand is unchanged, but the ability to grasp is lost. The inadequacy of mere body scales to capture abilities becomes more evident when the ability is, say, that of mailing a letter or that of scoring a point. We can now turn to some puzzling remarks Gibson made about the ontological status of affordances. Quote, "An important fact about the affordance of the environment is that they are, in a sense, objective, real, and physical, unlike values and meanings, which are often supposed to be subjective, phenomenal, and mental. But actually, an affordance is neither an objective property nor a subjective property, or it is both, if you like. And affordance cuts across the dichotomy of subjective-objective and helps us to understand its inadequacy. End of quote. And I think this is incredibly important. This is the voice of the friend. This is not an argument. It is making it possible for you to keep all your arguments and you can enforce them. It's opening up to greater understanding, and it doesn't put a point, doesn't put a polarity here. It's not an ideology. It's question without a question mark, so to speak. Look into this more carefully. And this is how I think we need to go about when it comes to Heidegger and Husserl and Derrida as well. You do it. You have to do it. It's not just to copy. Copy is good in the beginning, but then you have to do it. You need to do your own deconstruction. It's an act. And you can always say that the text is deconstructible. It's something that lends itself to closer observance. My little suggestion here was one can look closer at the TV series of Carl Sagan, The Cosmos, and observe that there are some details sticking out that are not firmly grounded in the objective of a TV series, and that is only understandable in the context of the TV series. This is what deconstruction is. We can only make our points stronger if we let them be together with the, so to speak, affordances they have. This is strengthening the text. Adding something like that is losing some of the strength of the text, its value, its force, I would say. But it can be tricky to notice. Therefore, deconstruction is foremost a careful reading in the creative sense. It needs an active reader in a way that takes good posture, an agile head, being constantly perky, active, wanting to see, wanting to understand. And that's more of an attitude than an ideology. That attitude needs to be firmly established within yourself. So we've gone very far from the Yale School of Literary Criticism, that passive process, and show that you need to build yourself, develop yourself to be able to go further. You cannot be passive. You cannot become active by passivity only. It's a good start, yeah. Starts like deconstruction is like an open-ended question. But then you need to get into it and you do your own deconstruction. See what things are for really. So, in a way, the Gibson theory of affordances is not the theory at all. It's looking closer where you already are and making you understand what are the words you're using, how do they work. They work in context in a way that you can investigate and find out. They work in the text, not outside of the text in some ways, oddly enough. And I think that's quite enough for now. Say thank you very much. Good luck out there with your own deal. And bye-bye for now.